and welcome back to the Marketing Chatroom. I'm super excited to be having this chat today with Hope. Hope Stadulis is our guest today, and she is a freelance brand marketing director in the outdoor space. So very, very excited to have you, Hope, and really excited to chat about our focus today is going to be on community and how community ties into marketing and branding and all of those pieces relative to what you have done in your career and what you're currently doing in the outdoor space.
Absolutely. I love it. And I think you're speaking my language. Community is at the epicenter of pretty much everything I've been focused on in brand marketing. I have been working in the agency world for the last 10 years. So this freelance gig is kind of my first foray into doing it myself. But I think what brought me into the space of working in the outdoors, as you mentioned, was really just loving it. I live in San Francisco and not far from you, but I'm staring at a park across the street, and I just think my love and affection for being in nature, whether that's like hiking, skiing, everything you got in Northern California, took me to a place of like, I need to work on it. I want to build brands. That in addition to being a yoga instructor, which is like a huge part of my identity. All these things are so, they're rooted in community. And so I think when I think about building a brand, I think immediately about the importance of bringing people together and sort of rallying them around shared values, and building a bridge toward connection. Because that's, I think, what people really want right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love how you've been able to tie together like your career passions with your personal passions, being the outdoors and fitness and yoga. Really cool when we're able to do that and just tie everything together. So, with your focus on both marketing and community, what have you seen? I think you've been in the space about 10 years, and the last 10 years have been, as we all know, a lot of changes in the digital space and in the marketing space.
It's crazy. I mean, I started out a bajillion moons ago in social media. And I think social media back in 2014 was a completely different ballgame. Um, Back in the day, I think organic social was the way to go, right? And that was kind of the way people thought about community. That's where that title, for those listening who are really embedded in social teams, like community manager, right? That came from this idea of interacting with people in a digital space. And I was working on that with Audi. And I think these moments where you could intercept people and build a relationship as a brand were really huge. And it was a new opportunity. So starting there, I think the bulk of my career has been focused on building integrated campaigns. So that's everything, a full marketing ecosystem that really includes like TV all the way down to those organic social posts. And things have changed a lot. I mean, like 5 years ago, we learned about the emergence of, paid media, the impact of that, and how you can leverage that to grow your audience as a brand. And then most recently, TikTok, not shockingly,
Uh-huh.
this aspect of digital community has also been just so major in building brands. We think about like Duolingo posting about how their mascot died and came back to life. And this is just like a way to humanize your brand and connect with people in the digital world. But I think ultimately, like what I've seen over time is people adapting 10 years ago social and now people rebelling and craving in person. All the people that loved yoga at home during the pandemic, digitally are now like, please get me to the studio. So I
Yeah.
think this like, let's flip everything on its head after the pandemic has been a major, major player in how things have changed throughout like the last 5 years. And then I think just naturally humans crave what they don't have as much of.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally see that too. And especially even just in 2025, the way things are quickly unfolding with influencer and how that's influencer. I meant AI, but like AI and
Yeah.
how it's impacting influencer marketing, just marketing in general, all things digital are like heavily moving toward AI now in a way that's like slightly alarming. Um, but
Lightly.
I'm with you. And I'm with you in the sense that I think that as this just becomes more and more of an overwhelming thing where it's just like digital AI, like everything is so online,
Right.
that people really just naturally do crave to be in connection with each other, whether that is that like through digital means, but in a real way, like we're doing right now,
Yeah.
or in person.
Yeah, and I think like the expectation is now that you have digital, right? Table stakes. I think what people are craving, coming out of the pandemic where like loneliness was peaking is the other side, the flip side of it. How do I leverage these channels that are given, these things that are handed to me to actually go out of my way now to create something where I have shared values with other people. And that's also a given, right? Like I step into a space that makes sense for who I am and what I stand for. And also like just enjoy life through experiences, right? Like back in the day, I remember doing all this research on millennials, right? And we love experiences. And then it was like, oh, Gen Z just wants to like build dance TikToks and live in this like world where they're watching other people. But I think ultimately, with the emergence of Gen Alpha and where Gen Z is headed, it's actually going the other direction. And so that also has brought me to a world where I'm like, what is going on in the outdoor space? Like, this is exactly in alignment with the experiences we're talking about.
Yeah, for sure. And I think something you mentioned made me think of like meaningful content, right? Like there's so much content out there right now coming from everywhere, coming from brands, coming from people, coming from just every avenue on every platform you could ever imagine. But how do we intentionally create content that is meaningful to someone, that creates a connection with someone, and therefore cultivates that community piece that you're talking about? I'd love to hear a little bit more about your experience with that, maybe in relation specifically to the outdoor community.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge question mark that I think we're still trying to figure out. But I do think the greatest learnings in just like the last few years, especially if you think about how big LinkedIn influencers have become, for instance, is people want to listen to brands that actually tap into people who have that expertise. So if we're talking about building meaningful content, let's make sure we're starting from a place of the people talking to us are actually experts. So you see, you see these, active wear brands that are actually leveraging athletes more than ever to create that. Because I think if you really think hard about who we listen to people who know what they're talking about. So the brand needs to be doing the same thing. And I think that's why we're in a place now in social media where athletes are influencers, like football
Mm-hmm.
players are influencers, right? And so brands to create meaningful content, especially in the outdoor space, they just need to leverage what they know in an authentic way. It's not Nike telling you what to think, it's Nike leveraging folks to share what they think that's in alignment with that brand. I think that's what meaningful content is right now, and I think we're still learning how we can make it even more meaningful. But it's all comes from authenticity and a place of like we know what we're talking about as a brand, and we know what you need to hear, what you're curious about.
I think that's fair that we don't really have it figured out yet. Everyone's trying, I think, really hard to create meaningful content in a super noisy space. Um, and bringing in those voices, yeah, I think athletes is a great example because athletes, like a lot of them, are kind of influencers, or they're becoming influencers, or they have influence in some way because people follow them, people look up to them, people go to them for inspiration and for tips on, like, how do I become better at XYZ. So it is cool to tie in those kinds of people to
And even
brands
as
that are relevant.
Yeah, and even as you think about sport and how that's evolving, people are more into these like 100K races, 100-mile races than ever. Trail running is now a sport. So
Uh-huh.
people aren't going to relate to a brand that's like, here's a trail running shoe. They're going to relate to a brand that's interacting with, bringing into their brand messaging, their content, whether it's social or all the way up to a TV spot, right? Those athletes that are running and winning or running and have unique stories to tell, right, about their journey and how running played into that, or where they live and how running has changed their lifestyle. Like that's what we can do now based on our access to everything as brands. But I think ultimately what people crave, right, is like a connection with the thing that they love rather than a connection with the product that the brand wants them to buy.
Exactly. Yeah, that story piece you mentioned is super important because then you're getting the whoever it is promoting the product, like their story and their actual story of using the product. Like, I'm thinking shoes, for example, because that's just there's more there than just like, look, isn't this shoe nice? It's functional. It does XYZ, but it doesn't have a personality because it's a shoe. So
I don't know. I'm sure like Adidas would say differently, but I think like we all know that what we wear is our representation of who we are, right? But we choose what we wear, or we subconsciously choose what we wear based on how these things align with our values. And I think that takes us back to community. Community is about shared values. So if you're able to tap into that, like some of the brands, for instance, Rafa, they are, a cycling brand that sells jerseys and cycling clothing and shorts. But they also have what they call, I believe they're called like community centers. Let's see,
Mhm.
I wrote it down somewhere. Yes, so they have club chapters, like 22 all across the country. And I actually just popped into one the other day, but they essentially sell the clothing and the merch, but what's actually really at the epicenter of the layout, the floor plan, is a coffee shop. So it's a place for folks to interact, and you can actually get a membership for like less than $100 to join rides. So you're able to kind of like go to this place where the merch is a huge part of the experience, but like you are engaging with people who are like-minded. And so I think like it comes back to that too of like how do we build subject matter expertise, but also like spaces where people can show up and engage with one another for that community aspect.
Right, absolutely. That's a great example. Really cool. And reminded me of my boyfriend's family does Ironman races and
Oh, that's a
they
fun family to be a part of.
yeah, it's fun. It's fun. They're always like they're into all the brands because the brands show up at the races and support the athletes and then they'll pick certain athletes. I don't know how exactly they do, but they've been a part of it where like they come in the certain kit, it's branded, and they're doing the race in that kit, and there's a whole group of them, and they have to go and like take photos before. So it's almost like they're influencers, but they're not. They're just like part of
Right.
this club which is promoting the brand at the race at a place where the whole entire target audience is going to be.
Yeah, and I think that's something that first of all, I need to know has your boyfriend's family tried to convince you to try one? Because that was my first question.
I
Maybe
am
I'll
running yeah, I am running two relays this year of the half Ironman. So just two half marathons. That's all I'm committing to at this point.
just to have, I mean, the contagion is real, right? Like the energy. And I think bringing brands in adds to that energy. It's like, oh,
hmm
first of all, like, I don't know if this is not premium enough of me, but I can't resist a freebie. So, like, if a brand is giving out goos or any sort of energy products or nutrition bars, like, I am there. I'm going to try them. So, that's huge, right? You're now embedding that in a very positive or intense or life-changing experience if you're running an Ironman. So the
hmm
brand is actually showing up in a place that's meaningful to you. I think that's huge. My qualm recently is actually, and I won't go into specifics, but I'm a big skier and I've watched a lot of ski content. I think what that industry hasn't quite mastered is integrating product and product functionality because it's so specific. Like this technology keeps you warm when you are backcountry skiing in XYZ temperature, right? I don't think we
hmm
figured out how to show that in a way that feels authentic to the sport. It still feels very forced. Like now we're going to show the label. And I think that's a space where we haven't figured it out. I think running and I think places like Ironman maybe have figured out a little more how to do that. Maybe because it's less super detailed and to understand like what a brand stands for and how the shoe works. Or maybe I'm just biased because I've seen a lot of ski content lately and I could be very critical of the space.
No, that's fair. I mean, and if you're in the target audience, you're kind of the best on the receiving end. You're the best person to speak to that as an expert marketer yourself. Like
I
it's
can't say I'm doing crazy backcountry stuff yet, but manifesting, this is the intersection with the yoga. manifesting that for like 2027 when I'm
Nice.
feeling like I'm capable. But yeah, I mean, being a part of that audience, you do have feelings, opinions, thoughts about what's cool. Like if you think about Black Crows 2 years ago, they came to the skiing scene with this splashy design and like wider skis for powder skiing. And also this origin story, I think, which was meaningful to folks of Chamonix, which is just kind of like this quintessential off the beaten path ski town in Europe. And I think showing up with that brought out a new community of extreme folks that are like, yes, I identify with this not US made brand that is showing up in a way that's like, I want to take it to the next level. This
Yeah.
stands for what I stand for. The technology is different, the look is different. And I think new brands often have the opportunity to do that really well, right? Because they're starting here and they're starting now, and that's what Black Crows really achieved a couple of years back.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. So it sounds like maybe what's missing in the ski world is like weaving in that brand messaging to the actual user experience, like the end experience. Like, why does this product and the way it works and the way it's made help you, as a skier, and why should you care even?
And why does it stand for what you believe in? I think we use the word lifestyle brands maybe a little
Uh-huh.
too much. I was recently like, what? I was Googling, like, what even is a lifestyle brand? Like, and it's just like all the biggies, right? Like Apple, Nike. So I think it's like these brands that have ideals that are big, bold, and they use them in every aspect of their communications plan. And they use them in the way that they invest and support other brands or athletes or the consumer. And I think the ski world or some of these outdoor brands that are coming into a very cluttered space are maybe having trouble identifying what the white space for them is. But if they're able to do that, these sports are very emotional. Like I hike to process my feelings and emotions. I hike in my Merrells, right? And why did I choose Merrells? Because they've been around forever. They're trustworthy. They have good customer service and they look like a hiking shoe. So
Yeah.
that's me choosing like a heritage brand that looks like what I envision hiking to be. And I can trust that they'll work when I am just out on a 10-mile hike thinking
Uh-huh.
my life. And I think not every brand has the advantage or disadvantage of being around for a long time. But if we think about these things, that's where we're able to intercept folks in a place that's meaningful to them and that helps bring them together with people that also care about similar things or want to do similar things.
Hmm. For sure. It's that like real world experience that they're getting with the product, and that story that's going
Yeah,
to be relevant to additional people in that market.
absolutely. And again, like I think the outdoor space has grown by nearly 7% in 6 years. Sorry. And that's largely attributed to just like the space gaining traction in terms of how people live and the way they view health, but also to the pandemic where people didn't know what else to do with themselves, right? And I know that the growth is slowing, but it's projected as an industry holistically to continue to grow year over year in a way that's notable, right? And so I think we need to think collectively about what that means for how to get a consumer's interest because there's so many brands doing it. And we're also in a world where the big brands are winning, right? The economy is in an interesting place. And so we want to give those smaller brands a shot because that's people love the underdog and they love new things like your Black Crows was. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so there's a lot of opportunity, but there's also a lot of competition right now. And I think that can make it harder to figure out where your space is and what you really want to say as a brand.
For sure. Yeah. Would you have any advice for, let's say, a smaller or newer brand that's looking to build that community, like looking to kind of take a step into emerging into the market, and they value community and they're trying to buy some space in, like you said, with all these really big players in the market spending millions and millions of dollars on their advertising strategy? Where
I
should they
love
start?
Patagonia dearly though. Like you can't turn
Uh-huh.
me against them. And what they stand for. big
For
fan
sure.
of
Yeah.
Yvonne Kennard. But I will say that don't sleep on small communities or communities that aren't necessarily viewed as the largest target market. For instance, San Francisco, I started investigating like what kind of roles there are here maybe a couple years ago in the outdoor space, especially as a marketer. Like I love where the space is headed. I'm curious. I also am part of the target. And I came to find out like there's not a lot going on because the cost of living here is high, the cost of running a business here is high. But what I've come to find is like there are less events and big branded moments here in this city because it's viewed as a smaller audience. That's a miss, in my opinion. And I think there's probably many, many more smaller towns and cities that aren't being directly spoken to. A good example of that, too, is like there's many smaller areas. I have a friend who joined a run club in Richmond, for instance, in Virginia, where I'm, and she is absolutely loving it. It has changed her lifestyle. It has evolved her community. But I've never heard her mention, and we've chatted a little here and there, any moments where like a brand has shown up in that experience. And I think just off off the cuff, like run clubs are a huge opportunity. We have tons here. Obviously the big outdoor markets are Denver and Oregon and, up in Seattle. And also like, I think it's like North Carolina is huge. Um,
Mhm.
but I haven't seen a lot of that here. And I think that's a miss. I haven't seen a lot of engagement with run clubs. And I think that when you are able to tap into an authentic community as it already stands, there's so much power to that, right? Like, how do I put my product in the middle of that experience? Or even if it's, we are like Athletic Brewing Club, I think is doing the best job because they're showing up at races in a space where people are very health conscious and they don't want to drink, but they want the experience of having a drink.
Yeah.
And so it's like, how do brands like that? And this is easy, but like host a happy hour if you're an Athletic Brewing Co. where this non-alcoholic industry is popping off because of sport. Or just like get engaged with these social moments, these social clubs in a way that embeds your brand into their experience and these positive moments of connection.
Yeah, that's so true. Because I think everyone goes straight to like the big platforms and the big spaces. And like you said, the bigger cities and areas that are more well known for what they're offering, which does make a lot of sense. But it's like, okay, if we're looking to find little pockets of the market that aren't already super saturated, yeah, I think that's super smart. Those little clubs, those small towns, like people love what they love. It doesn't matter where they live, right? Like you can get super niche with your audience and find them where they are, which is maybe not always exactly where you expect at first glance.
Yeah, yeah. And not every brand has to have mass appeal. Like I just read a statistic that for small businesses, 2 out of 3 employees that are contributing to, I think it's like the profit or the general production of the private sector economy here in the US, 2 out of 3 of those employees are part of small businesses. And so we don't always have to think of everything as mass marketing. There is a magic and a beauty to finding your pocket of people and speaking to them. And I think a lot of the mom and pops that are starting are trying to do it big everywhere, but people do engage in digital platforms and e-commerce is a powerful tool. That being said, you will, I think, personally get more traction by just talking to the people who care about what you care about in their community, can connect over it, can evangelize your brand. And it's not necessarily always essential to be a mass market brand.
Yeah, for sure. More importantly, just to kind of get in front of the right people, no matter if it's a smaller amount of people. And I imagine, I'm going to ask you because I don't know, but I would imagine that having a face to the brand is important in that space rather than just being a product.
I think that's a huge part of it. And that could be done via founders because people love rooting for the underdog. I think I kind of mentioned that, right? With like your
Mhm.
challenger brands, but it can also be done through who uses the brand and why. So that's athletes or average people like me who just love to, take part in these outdoor sports. But I do think there is a lot to be said about putting faces to a brand because you are literally humanizing them in a way that resonates with people, right? Like we connect with people because they look like us, they sound like us. And a brand that talks at us isn't necessarily feeling like that. It's feeling like a corporate megaphone, right? And so
Mhm.
root for people. And community is a place that I just read a research study by Harvard, I think. And it, basically said that you live longer if you have tight friendship circles, tight communities.
Yeah.
And so that's something that's been instrumental in society as a whole forever. And as digital platforms evolve and change and the world changes, that's not going to change. So,
Yeah.
so I think, yeah, I think having faces and humanizing is also all wrapped up in this idea.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. I love when the founders, especially if it's a smaller brand that's kind of trying to get out there. I love when the founders talk about the brand and just share little tidbits, little small tidbits and stories about why they founded it and what their values are and why it's important to them.
I mean, because it's America and we champion ideas and we
Yes.
champion people who go against the grain. And I think a lot of us are intrigued by an alternate approach to life, to living, right? And not necessarily always following the beaten path. And we know that about Gen Z too. Like they're not doing what everybody else did because they've come to find that that doesn't necessarily get you where you want to go. And I respect that. And I think
Yeah.
a lot can be learned from that approach as well.
For sure. Yeah, yeah, I agree. Well, thank you for sharing your experience. And over the last 10 years, it seems like so much has changed. And I'm sure the next 10 years will bring potentially even more change to
You
this.
mentioned AI. I've obviously steered away from that here, but there's tons that can be said about what that means. But I think I don't know that that will have as measurable of an impact on this like grassroots community aspect I've been talking about today, anyways.
Yeah.
I hope. I hope
Yeah, I
things
mean,
will be in there.
we'll see. Yeah. We'll see.
On the old school.
Um, yeah. Well, thank you for sharing your insights and your expertise. I think this will be a really valuable episode for the listeners, especially anyone interested in cultivating community and getting into the outdoor space related to marketing. So I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Kayla. It's been a blast to be here and to just kind of think about and talk about the way the world's changing. And, I'd love to reconnect in a year or a couple months or whatever, because I'm sure everything will have changed again. But
For
thank
sure. Yeah.
you.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And you all can find Hope on LinkedIn, and I'll drop any other notes you want me to drop in the show notes. And
Thank
that's it for now. Yeah. Thank you.
you so much, Kayla.
Bye.